And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
In each episode, our special guest brings with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, our guest is Nick Kozakis. He's a horror and music video director who's worked with musical artists like Tones and I and has made shorts like Hunter. His latest film, Godless, the Eastfield Exorcism, which I am quoted as saying it had my stomach in my asshole on a Little Cuts, is currently streaming on Tubi. Welcome to the show, Nick.
Thank you so much for having me. Big fans of your work, especially your review of our film. This is one of the best things that came out of my whole entire life. So I don't know if that's sad or amazing, but it was so good to read that. As soon as I did that, I'm like, I'm putting that everywhere. I might even get it tattooed.
Hell yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Make it permanent.
It was just...
So glad. Changing lives every day with my prose.
It was just, after we've had, quite a lot of complimentary reviews, it was just the one that stood out the most. And I'm like, you know what? I'll never unhear that. So it was perfect.
It's honest. It's raw. It gets right to the point.
Right in the moment.
Right in the moment. Anyway, well, can you tell our listeners a little bit about Godless, the Eastfield Exorcism, if they're not familiar with it?
Yeah, so it's a film that is born out of a lot of events that are inspired by it. So it's like I was trying to come up with a film that was kind of your conventional exorcism films. I love those films. I love that subgenre. But the more I started researching the exorcism genre and the real life cases, the more I was horrified about real life exorcisms and what was going on out there. And I couldn't shake that feeling. I couldn't shake the whole unnerving situation of people dying by exorcisms and how eerily common they were. So then we had constructed a film with our writer Alex Anglis Wilson, who kind of took most of these cases and compiled it into one. And our film is about Lara, who is a woman that's tormented and torn between science and faith, but she's pushed by her husband to seek treatment from a congregation of zealots and a ruthless exorcist who will try to save her soul by putting an innocent woman through hell. So it was a really dark subject matter. And, whilst it's not a conventional exorcism film and we don't have those spinning heads happening, we still have an exorcism film because it's technically an exorcism, just not in the usual way.
Yeah. Yep. So I watched it today, and what really struck me was, I'm not a huge fan of exorcism films. I feel like we've seen a lot of them, but what I really enjoyed about yours in particular is the way in which it sort of subverted expectations and kind of put an eye on different people in the exorcism, as opposed to the idea of the devil and stuff, that there was actually the people doing it, which maybe not exactly the best people to be performing an exorcism.
Yeah, it was kind of to reframe the monster, so to speak, was really kind of a tricky thing for us to try and pull off, and hopefully we did. I mean, it seemed to have worked for you, Mary Beth, but I'm glad that it has resonated with some people, because we go out there and we put the film on and we've had screenings and we get nervous. It's like, oh, what if people are just going to be so disappointed that we don't have a Reagan type that's going to be walking backwards and all those kind of things. But it's really kind of worked out well for us that we did take a different path with it. So we're pretty proud of it, and we're just excited to get as many eyeballs across it. And I love hearing the feedback as well. I've had so many people DM me and other people in the cast and all that, and I'm pretty kind of active in replies, so it's been fun connecting with people about how they felt about the film, so it's been good.
Yeah, so I read a review that was talking about how it was they said that, I mean, you obviously said that it's based on a bunch of different exorcisms, and they had brought up this one that happened in 1993, I think, in Australia. I was reading that, and I noticed a couple points that definitely I could see pulling from that based on a true story aspect. And that story was pretty hellish. Is that one that, do you know if that one is one that really influenced your writer?
Yeah, I'd have to ask him specifically, but he took a bunch of court cases. So it's okay. There was one in particular from New Zealand that was pretty much the same thing, and it was a woman that suffered mental health issues, and this is what's so crazy about it as well. It's I think that one from '93 is a pretty good reference, but I'm going to tell you the one from New Zealand that's almost identical, and it's her name was Janet Moses, and she suffered from mental health. Her family thought that she was possessed. So they brought in a self-appointed exorcist to come in and start performing exorcisms. And suddenly it's like, well, those stories are so identical, you know? So and then it just happened 6 months or a year ago to a 6-year-old girl in Perth. So it's like, it's, like our age bracket with the character of Lara is closer to the age of Janet Moses, but like there's so many people, and Annalise Michelle was like in her late teens. So it's almost, it's as bad as it is to say, it's almost scripted in like the demise of these people. It's like someone's sick, they identify her as possessed, then they get someone who claims to be an exorcist to come in. They start brutalizing them. Then they end up being brutally injured or dead.
I was curious what it was like scripting, well, not really scripting, but like directing all of the violence in this movie. Because a lot of it, there is a lot of violence in this movie, and it's all really directed at Lara. And it's, I think, one of the reasons why it's so brutal, and also, unfortunately, one of the reasons why it's so effective, because we see, like, possession movies are always, like, a brutalization of a woman, but it's a demon. Like, we're going to defeat the demon, but here, it's another man, and also other women, like, other people just, like, doing the most unspeakable things to this person. And so what was that like, directing these scenes and kind of being in this and making this and having to like, physically be a part of that and directing that violence? Like, what is that experience like?
It's amazing because it's like some of the reviews that have come out, even user reviews, someone wrote, I feel like I took part in a murder. And,
it does feel like that. Like, you feel dirty after watching your movie. So thanks, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. Like, do you know how guilty I feel turning around saying, hey, I hope you enjoy the film, because I know you can't. Like, so it's like, it's a really kind of tricky situation, to be in. But, one thing that, like, it's great that you bring this up is one of our producers, Lauren Simpson, she is the president of Women in Film and Television. And we brought her into this film to make sure that we were doing right and justice towards women as well. We didn't want it to be like a torture porn situation where we're like beating on a woman and, kind of exploiting that, except for the fact that the movie that I'm going to talk about is kind of got like a little bit of these themes too. But we had a wellness coordinator on set as well. And
cool.
She Stephanie Powers, who was just incredible to make sure that our actors were safe. So, and a lot of this credit goes to Georgia, who plays Lara. She's not only is she an incredible actor, but she's just, her attitude on set was, as soon as the cameras were on, she was on. So you're like watching, my heart was sinking. And like, I have a very animated rubbery face. It's almost Jim Carrey-like, where it just like moves all over the place. So like, she's pulling these faces and my face is contorting and like my heart's sinking. I'm like, oh no, we're torturing a woman. And then as soon as we'd yell cut, she'd come out and she'd be pulling stupid faces and having a laugh and like making fun of me as a director. So the mood was always quite light. So despite having really heavy subject matter, a really heavy subject matter in this film, and, like we had these torture related scenes to this poor woman, the intention was always right. Like, we wanted to show violence for the way violence is, but not overdo it. And, that's why we hold some punches and we cut away, because I think the sound indicates enough as to what's going on. But when the violence does take place, which has happened to so many people, which I can't say for spoiler reasons, so you'll have to watch it, happens in the last part of the film, we didn't want to shy away from that. We wanted to show like the severe danger that people can be put into because of dangerous beliefs and dangerous thinking, and the think tank environment that people put themselves in.
Yeah, that's one thing I really noticed and really appreciate about the film, is the way that kind of the groupthink mentality, where one person starts things and then all of a sudden everyone is filled with righteous rage, whatever that kind of fear, that paranoia, that anger, that that kind of fills through everybody. And I really enjoyed the fact that it was like a communal, I mean, enjoyed is a wrong word, but like that it was like a communal experience of that sort of showing that righteous anger that can come out when people are dusting at the pulpit or whatever.
Yeah. It was, and it's kind of like, we have like a lot of theories that are kind of going out there as well, which is again why I love hearing from people individually as well. But it's like, it's a generational thing as well. Like, you've got someone like Daniel James King, who has like, he's been instilled from birth and at a young age that he is that he has the voice of God in him. And that's like a very old mentality thinking of like, even going back to ancient Greeks, which is part of my heritage, people weren't in love because they felt love. It was because a god of love was telling them, you're in love with that person. So every thought he has in that film is not his own thought. It's God's thoughts, and it's God's voice that's speaking through him. So then suddenly he starts telling everybody else that he is the voice of God, and they start believing that. And now suddenly the most sane person in the room is clinically insane, and nobody wants to listen to her. So it's a really, really tragic tale.
Yeah. It really is.
Well, and this is your first feature, right? So, wow, what a way to like jump in to making feature-length horror films is this one. Have you always wanted to be, like, I know you have directed a lot of music videos, and has kind of the transition to feature filmmaking been a goal or a dream of yours?
Yeah, it's I've always loved narrative, and like I'll toy with little bits and pieces. I did co-direct another one, but like if I'm gonna be real, I was more like an assistant director than anything else. But but I did like more of the blocking side of things. But it's
Okay.
I've always loved narrative, and like if you watch most of my music videos that aren't performance based, I always try to put a narrative into it, and I always try to keep a story kind of going. So you know, like definitely my love is in narrative storytelling, and music videos are just fun for like the visuals and experimentation, and you know, you kind of get it in and out, and yeah, like I definitely want to keep in the realm of narrative filmmaking.
That's so cool. But speaking of music videos, though, the Tones and I, how was it working with Tones and I? Because you've done a number of her videos.
We're basically family now. So it's like, you know, we started off, that's just such a crazy, interesting story. So it's like, it starts off with, I'm directing a commercial in Australia we have trams. So it's like, and it's for Yarra Trams. And I get a call from a friend, and she's like, hey, I was on a music video, but I've done all this prosthetics makeup to make this artist look old, but I think they're gonna can the video. Can I pass your details on to the manager? And I'm like, yeah, sure. So the manager calls me, Tones' manager, Jackson, and he's like, hey, we need to make a music video, and we need to do it last week. It's for a small artist. She hasn't got any label backing or anything like that. And we're like, look, send it through. Let's see if we can make it work. She said they send all the details through, and we're like, I don't think we can do this clip. I don't think we physically have the time to do it. So Tim Whiting, who's the producer and co-founder of Visible with myself, he's like, look, I'm just going to figure out a way to make this work because we've kind of delayed and we haven't replied yet. So we're just going to do it and have fun with it. And then later it becomes 2 billion views on YouTube. So it's
ridiculous.
Like the most sliding doors kind of thing ever, you know, where had we not have done it, it doesn't like amount to us getting backing for this film. So it's like, it was sort of a chain reaction where people had belief to say, hey, these guys know how to make a video and know how to get eyeballs across it, and they're competent. And since then, she's repaid the faith and the love and the loyalty. So we pretty much, she couldn't afford to make that video clip. And when we did take it on, we were like, well, it looks like we're going to have to pay for it ourselves in some capacity. So we added money into it. Since then, she just blew up to be such a mega superstar. And we've done, I think, 11 music videos together.
Dang.
You know, plus, like, I think in that is like 2 live ones, and one was for Jimmy Kimmel, Fallon, one of the Jimmys, and, you know, and, yeah, it was like really awesome. It was definitely Jimmy Kimmel. It's Kimmel. It came to mind. So, yeah.
That's so
cool.
Yeah. So it's been great.
That's so cool too, to like have that experience making music videos. And like you were saying, you can experiment, I feel like, with imagery so well. And I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like that really helps, especially with horror films and the imagery you need to create in horror films, and giving you a lot of ways to like kind of refine how you want your feature horror films to look.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I mean, stylistically, we went for a really raw and gritty feel for this film, but like then we have those stylized moments, like, you know, when the Bible group are praying outside, and you got that scene with the locusts that was just a fluke chance, by the way. Like, those bugs came into the frame without us knowing it. We're like, what is happening here? And then we rolled cameras, and then suddenly we're like, these are locusts. This is real. This film's cursed. We found out they were termites afterwards, but it doesn't matter. Let's not get in the way of a good story, right? So
yeah, exactly.
But that's such an incredible moment to add in. Like, all right, cool. There's a swarm of bugs. Go with it, guys. That's crazy.
But even like, there's a sequence with a car, which I won't give away too many spoilers, but like that's shot in a very kind of stylized way, and that comes from our music video days. But the music videos are cool to like kind of find cheap tricks and like get the maximum amount out of a shot. And for a film that's so tiny in our budget, to the point where we don't even have a marketing spend, like it was really cool to like use those tricks and do a scene. Like the biggest compliment that we got was a very prolific producer was like, I read your script and it should have been a $4 to $5 million Australian dollar film, and if you told me for the amount that you did it for and the budget you did it for, I would have laughed you out of my office. So it was like a really cool backhanded compliment, but it was an awesome compliment to get. So we were really happy with that.
Well, hopefully that leads to like more higher budget stuff for you.
Yeah. If I can get more than a chip packet and like a sandwich for my pay, no, it was good. Like we made sure that everyone was paid, and everyone was paid like the industry minimum rates that we could afford. But like a lot of these people are people that we had relationships with on music videos and commercials, so they were kind of like, hey, we're happy to help out because you employ us on other jobs. So we're like, yes, let's cash in every favor. So I owe everyone for the rest of my life.
Indie horror filmmaking at its finest. How many people can we call in favors with to do this for money, but less? I understand that.
Yeah.
But I mean, it worked out and you made something amazing. But I'm curious about how you got into horror films. Has horror always been something that you've been drawn to? Like, how did your relationship with the horror genre start?
So it starts off with the fact that I'm an accident child. So it's like, I'm the third in my family, but there's like 16 years difference between me and the other guys. So it's like, they're not really big into horrors, but occasionally they would hire VHSs or buy VHS tapes, and, which is like a dead like format, which I don't even know how many users would know what that is, but it's a cassette tape.
I have a bunch in my room, so
yeah, I know they're becoming like the new records, back. Right? Like they're coming back.
They are.
I think horror fans more than anyone else know VHS.
Totally, right? Like it's and nothing had cooler covers than horror films. It's like I remember Fright Night had like a coffin as like a tape, and like I worked at a video store, so it's like that was the most problematic tape to file away because it was like in the shape of a coffin, so it was like you couldn't even put it anywhere. But I like being the accident child, they would leave tapes around, and I was not like the most behaved kid, so I'd take those tapes and chuck them in a VHS and watch them. And the first one to get me was Evil Dead. That made me physically ill when I was a kid. I think I was like, I was 7. Before that, it was The Exorcist. And I was 6 when I watched that. And that freaked me out. But even then, I was kind of able to remove myself a little bit from that because it felt like everyone was okay at the end, with the exception of, the priest. Like that one freaked me out, but I'm like, okay, we can cure the devil. But Evil Dead really scarred me because it was just like, hey, scarred for life, right? Like, what a plug. And so it really scarred me because like all that stop motion animation, but like watching limbs getting chopped up, watching people decompose and like melt and like break down and all that. Yeah, Evil Dead was the one that really screwed me up, and I actually felt sick. Like I wanted to throw up. I remember pacing after seeing that film, and now it's like one of my favorite films. So, but that was the one that got me into horror. But I think between those two and the first Terminator, which I consider a horror as much as it is an action,
it's 100% a slasher.
Yeah. I think like I just absolutely loved the art behind it because I come from like an illustration, graphic design background, and the art behind it and like the makeup and all the prosthetics and all that kind of stuff, it really got me thinking about how this stuff is done. So then I started looking up things, and that's where my first passion for Fangoria came into play, because then they would have interviews with like, prosthetics makeup artists, and you got your Tom Savini's and all that kind of stuff. So it's just like, yeah, that's where the evolution starts. And then my mind got into worse and worse things from there.
So you find tapes like just hanging around the house, you watch them on a lark. Were you a scaredy cat growing up, or did you handle them okay?
I'm a scared adult. I don't think I'm afraid of everything. I'm arachnophobic. I'm afraid of flying. I'm afraid of the unknown. It's I think I'm still afraid of everything. And I think and this is where it's funny, but also kind of serious. But I think therapy would be much cheaper for me to go through than making films, because I think I do it as making films is like my form of therapy. So I do this now. So then that way I can just kind of say, hey, at the end of the day, after all the violence that all these characters have endured, everyone's okay. It's like a point of afterlife. That's my way of thinking. Because everything's okay, we still live on. But I think that's where I kind of curbed that fear. And then watching other people being afraid around me made me not feel alone. So it's wow, this is a therapy session. Thank you so much.
So do you still get scared of horror movies now? When you watch them as an adult?
Yeah. I think now the older I get. So I used to love gore and violence, and then I go and jump in to watch two films, which is I'm watching Late Night with the Devil, which is by the Cantons brothers, and it's so amazing. And I don't know if you've seen it, but
not yet, no.
Film. And there's a sequence in there that has a really horrific body horror type thing, and I'm just and I'm kind of feeling it at the same time. And then I watched Talk to Me, and again from other Aussie filmmakers, which. We don't have to say how awesome that film is. It's just...
But it is real fucking good, y'all, when it comes out.
It is good.
If this July 28th, you guys need to also Talk to Me in theaters. Anyway, plug for Talk to Me.
And for Australia, 27th, do it. It's between that and Late Night with the Devil, those two are such incredible films. But yeah, I was watching that and I'm kind of cringing. So the more I'm seeing violence now, the more I'm kind of feeling it. I don't know if it's the fact that I'm getting older and if a toaster pops and I pull my neck quickly, I feel the pain, so it's now I'm feeling everything triple time. So yeah, it's
weird. Yeah. Wow. Interesting. I love to hear that, because I feel so many people are oh yeah, I'm desensitized, but you're no, I'm actually a little bit more afraid as I've gotten older.
Yeah, I'm getting worse. So it's eventually I'll probably have to stop making films and check myself in somewhere.
Well, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. You know what I mean?
That's our producer's problem. Tim and Lauren and Tony, they can deal with that.
So I have to ask, though, because you said you're arachnophobe. I have huge arachnophobia. I have to ask, whenever I hear about Australia and the spiders, I get paranoid. What is it like being there if you are an arachnophobe?
It's the worst. It's so the one spider that doesn't really harm you with poison is the ugliest looking spider. It's the huntsman.
Big one, the huntsman? Yeah, the one that is scarily huge, but definitely aren't mean, but they still look terrifying.
Yeah, they're the worst. And I read a statistic that they're actually the biggest killers in Australia, not because of their bite, but because people panic when they see them on the road and they crash. I know, it's really brutal. So it's I've had it the worst. They, despite me not liking them, I don't want to be friends with them. I then will try and catch them to kind of let them outside, because I don't want to kill them either. But I have I have to get them in a Tupperware container and then throw the container on the side of the street and then come back a day later to pick up, so I'm not littering as well.
Why is there so much Tupperware outside of Nick's house? It's just the spiders. It's just the spiders.
So,
just the spiders.
But yeah, I've had them crawl all over me, and I have been bitten at a warehouse when I was doing my warehouse work by a spider, because I accidentally put a little bit of pressure on it. It was underneath a box, and I put the box underneath my arm, and I was like, is that sticky tape that's pulling on my hairs because I'm European? And then I look, and it was sort of hanging because it was being crushed by the box and it was trying to bite its way through, and I panicked, and not a fan. And because of Arachnophobia, the film, every shoe that I have, I will throw on the ground outside before I put them on, because if I put my feet in, I think that I'm going to be bitten. So I should just I should only wear sandals from now on, basically, is where it's at. So
Terry's very similar.
Yes. So we had just talked with Chrissy Fox, filmmaker, about arachnophobia, and that is my scarred for life moment, because it didn't give me arachnophobia, but it made me very fearful of anywhere they could be. It made me realize they could be literally anywhere. anywhere. In your shoes, in a lamp, in a box of food. Like, they could be anywhere. So I can relate.
Yeah, it's not fun. But speaking of which, I want to give a plug to your podcast as well, because it's awesome. Like, some of the movies that are on there are such deep cuts. Everyone needs to go and watch it. Like, I was like, yeah, you were like, hey, let's talk about a film that you want to do, and let's see if there's a new one that hasn't been done before. I'm like, cool. Nobody's seen Amityville Horror 2. It's about time. It's on there. And then I'm like, okay, well, I can't talk about that, which is that melting scene, which is one of the craziest things that I've ever seen in my life. And then we're to the point where it's like I never wanted to go on a date with someone because I felt like I would melt into a drain. And then the other one was Martyrs, which is like one of my all-time favorite films, so that was going to be on there. But yeah, like there was so many deep cut films in there. I'm really impressed with how far...
It's actually
surprising.
shocked us, to be honest, about how many movies, because we're always like, we've only had to do repeats like 1 or 2 times because we're like, people really have a wide range of things that have fucked them up and things that aren't scary. It's been cool. It is really cool to see what has scared and like what people have picked.
Yeah,
we honestly did not believe that we'd get to like we're getting close on 200 episodes, and I'm like, there's really 200 movies that scarred people for life. Like it's wild to me that we have been able to continue on. But yeah, that's just wild.
Actually, it's a perfect transition to let's talk about the movie you brought, Nick, that scarred you for life. Nick, what movie are we talking about with you today?
We're going to be talking about Audition, Takashi Miike's masterpiece, and it's wow, what a film! And like this still. We all know that the sound is going to stay in our heads for the rest of our lives, and we'll get to that at some point. But that one killed me.
So, listeners, let me read you a super brief synopsis for Audition. In Audition, a widower takes an offer to screen girls at a special audition arranged for him by a friend to help him find a new wife. The one he fancies, though, is not who she appears to be after all.
Yes, so take us back. How old were you when you saw this movie? How did you see it? And why is this your scarred for life pick?
So this film comes in 2 parts. So it's like, I saw it when I was really young. I was in my late teens. So it's like, probably getting closer to adult. But it was like on a late night. We have a channel called SBS, and it's kind of like it has a lot of foreign cinema. And although the film is about a fever dream type thing, there's a lot of fever dream elements in it. I had the flu and I thought I was having a fever dream. So it was like Inception levels of fever dream in this. So I chuck on this film because I couldn't sleep, and I'm watching it, and it starts off, with a man who is really kind of, depressed. He's mourning the loss of his wife. And you start to fall in love with him as a character, and you're like, I feel sorry for him. And then he does this like weird 180 where he wants, like, his friend is like, hey, we should kind of exploit innocent women and like put them through an audition process, and you'll find a new person to remarry and fall in love with. And I'm like, okay, this is kind of weird, but like, I can understand that this could maybe be an unconventional type of romance. Let's see where this goes. I'm sort of in and out of it, and then this film takes a turn for the worst. Where if we talk about like Godless, that has like, you feel like you're taking part in a murder, this film feels like you're taking part of you're being part of a torture, and that you're not only being a part of it, but you're also experiencing it at the same time. So, I was really young, and then I saw it, and I really couldn't shake it, but I didn't know what it was called. And then Hostel comes out many years later, and Takashi Miike has a cameo in it. I'm like, who's that guy? And I researched it.
Wait, does he really?
Yeah. So he comes out of like you've got Paxton who goes into the warehouse, and he's just like, what's it like in there? And the guy's like, be careful, you'll spend all your money in there. And then that's him. So I'm like, who that guy has to be a cameo. So then I'm like, I've researched that, and I'm like, oh, okay, he's made like a whole bunch of horrors, and this Audition film is like a big thing. And I put it in, and I'm like, oh no, it's that film. Oh no. And it's the train wreck. You watch it and you're like, I shouldn't be watching this, but you just get so sucked in. And then I'm like, you know, because it's such a slow burn film. It's close to 2 hours. I'm like, maybe I just remembered it wrong. And it's like, this isn't that bad. And then it's just like, no, it really is that bad. In the last 30 minutes, you just want to check out of life after watching that. It's just like, I want to go hide in a black hole.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, that's I can't say it any better than that. That is how this movie feels towards the end. I remember seeing it. I remember hearing about it all the time and seeing the cover, the American cover at least, which is the woman holding like a needle and kind of turning towards the camera kind of thing. And I remember seeing this and hearing this is most fucked up movie ever. And I remember sitting down to watch it the first time. It was probably only like 5 or 6 years ago, to be perfectly honest. And I'm watching it and I'm going, this is like a romantic drama. What? I mean, it's a little weird. Like the kind of conceit, but it's sort of like you would see that conceit almost in like an American romantic comedy of like, oh, we're going to try to do this. And oh, by the way, we're falling in love. And oh, this is great. And I'm like, why is this movie considered like the most fucked up movie?
And you're right. Like, sorry to interrupt, but it's like there's that whole sequence where they're auditioning people and they're laughing at them. They're like doing crazy, weird things. Like they're doing like flamenco dancing and then it's like all hypercut and the music's really lighthearted as well. So it's just like, you're right. It does feel like a romantic comedy where it's like they're going to find the one, you know, kind of thing. But yeah, go on. Yeah.
And it's going to be one of those things where it's like, oh, that's going to be the breakup moment. There was no movie. And then, you know, that becomes like the fall apart and they get back together. Like, that's the way it plays out. And I'm like, how is this a horror movie? And then you see like that bag in the background. And the moment that bag rolls for the first time in her apartment, I was like, what? Yeah. What is happening?
One of the best jump scares I've ever seen, by the way. Like absolutely. That bag rolling. I'm like, what happened? Yeah.
And then it just gets progressively worse until we get the infamous line of kitty, kitty, kitty. It's gnarly. When did you first see it, Mary Beth?
Sorry, my cat has joined me on my lap, so that's what's happening here right now. Okay, I've talked about this. I've talked about this class in college many times because this is where in college I saw High Tension and in college I took a horror movie class and my teacher was really into international horror, and so I saw I didn't see Martyrs. I saw High Tension and Inside in this class, and I also saw Audition. This was one of the films that was part of our curriculum that he wanted to show us. And so I was really excited because I had heard of it before when I was younger, but I had never like had the guts to watch it because I heard how fucked up it was. And like the woman with the needle, I was like, and I hate needles. So I was just like, I don't ever want to experience that. And I also wasn't as familiar with Japanese horror. And so this is one of the movies that actually got me really into Japanese horror. I've always liked J-horror, but this one was one that like opened up my eyes to like what it can be and how it's not just ghost. I was more familiar with like the ghost story kind of J-horror that a lot of us are used to. And this one, I mean, I was watching it in class and my professor was like, don't let this movie fool you. Like, don't just trust me, okay? And I was like, okay. And again, it's like this weird ass dramedy, like where you feel bad for this older widow with his son, and like they live this life where his son is like, you can date again, like please, Dad, like you're kind of a bummer. And then like it becomes this very like misogynistic but like very 90s comedy vibe of like, let's audition some hot chicks for you to like find a wife. Like it's so again playing with these tropes of what we expect from a romance movie, especially in the States, of like what we expect in like a romance comedy. And it's playing with that, and like this whole time you're kind of like, there's something creepy here about him like auditioning her without her knowing to be his girl. Like there's just something, there's like that creepy vibe. And the woman who plays, her name is Asami. Asami is our woman, who is played incredibly by Ihie Ishina, who is like a method actor in Japan. Like this woman ate her own vomit for this movie. Like she puked and ate it.
Yeah, it's so brutal. That scene
like she's
is
it's nuts. But then like this movie, I think is so. It's also like one of Miike's most restrained movies, which is truly saying something. Because listeners, if you're not familiar with Takashi Miike, this man is a prolific filmmaker and he loves violence.
So
I mean, like Ichi the Killer, Visitor Q, weird ass shit. And this is just as weird, but it's much, I think, this one is more palatable in a way because the violence at the end, and like, that sounds so weird to call this movie palatable because it is like very intense, but like compared to what other things he's made, like, Nick, are you familiar with Mike's work? Like, have you watched a lot of his other movies?
And
okay.
None of them are like this. Like, it's
none
like,
of
yeah,
them.
they're very
It's
much
wild.
Yeah.
It's so wild. Like, the kinds of his filmmaking, like, style. And he's also made a lot of anime adaptations, but that's neither here nor there. I just think it's wild, like, what this man is making. He makes like 5 movies a year. Like, he is a very prolific filmmaker.
Yeah. It's like his IMDb is like 100 plus at least, you know.
Yes,
it's like
he's made over 100
like,
movies, which is nuts.
But I want to give a shout out to your lecturer. Like, that 3 cool movies that he introduced you to, cool or like disturbing, but like High Tension, you know, Inside, which was another one that I was going to suggest bringing to this one, but I think that's already been done, right? On one of your someone's doing that.
We did a special episode like on our Patreon about it, but no one's brought it to talk about.
Oh, okay, yeah, like, and then obviously Audition, but yeah, definitely that. Like everything that you've just said, it's just like that vomit scene is where the film takes a different turn, you know, and then that's where I was just like eating your own vomit, and then feeding it to that like sack man, you know, like, which is just. Oh, yeah, brutal. So brutal.
Well, and it's just like one of these movies that isn't afraid to like, and again, it's because it's Mike of like, but I hadn't seen anything like that. That was like super taboo pushing as much as like, again, it was early in my like going into the fucked up realm of horror career because I love extreme horror. I love fucked up horror. But again, that class was what got me into it and showing me, because that professor also showed us Tetsuo the Iron Man, which is another really incredible Japanese cyberpunk movie. Yeah. So he was like, you're gonna just watch all of the weirdest shit from these countries and either you're gonna love it or you're gonna hate it. And I came out a new person, and now my impersonality is the most fucked up shit you can find. So hey, what can you do?
What you've said is exactly that. I think, you know, growing up with horror and like some of the movies that I reference, which is like Evil Dead and all that, like the deaths are kind of quick and they happen so abrupt, and there's that shock value where it's just like, oh wow, that came out of nowhere. And then like a lot of the violence was kind of almost actiony. This is the first time where I'm sat down and I'm watching a live, slow, dragged out torture process. But not just that. It's the sound design that's haunting.
Yeah.
I actually, and the way that they frame the camera. So like when Asami is like on top of Aoyama, which is the guy, and it's almost eye level and like almost point of view, and she's puncturing his eyes, and she's doing the kitty 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 kitty, and like it felt like it was happening to me, and I'm hearing these piercing sounds, and it's almost the sound that you'd hear in your own brain, like if you were like kind of going through it. So it's it really kind of disturbed me on that front, where I was just like, oh no, this is happening to me. And I'll never forget the moment where she's punctured his torso and then she jumps and sits on top of him and grinds across all those pins. It was like, oh no. And I thought that was the worst. And then it gets worse. And then it gets worse. So
it really does though. Like, and I mean, like, so when I first watched this as a young college student, I was like, Asami sucks. And now I'm like, Asami rules. I mean, again, I know she's a bad person. I would never do this to a man. But like, I kind of love her and like what she represents for like feminine rage. And again, I love a good feminine rage movie because I mean, like, I think something that is kind of overlooked a lot talking about this is Asami was assaulted as a child, like by her dance teacher. And she has like her whole life kind of been defined by how men have treated her. And now she's like, all right, cool. Well, I'm going to just say, I'm going to show you what happens when you fuck with me. Like, this is what happens when you enable my rage and what happens when you do these kinds of things to me. Because I mean, we see those hints at first with the guy in the bag. And then Aoyama meets her dance teacher who doesn't have any feet anymore. And it's like all of these really weird things happening. And then you realize that like Asami is just like trying to reclaim some semblance of agency over herself. And like, I think I love that in this movie and how it is like this kind of smart, subtle, then very obvious like movie about her yeah, she's a bad person on like the surface, but there's a lot more going on with her that's much more complicated than just like her wanting to kill boys, but her trying to like take revenge for men who have taken advantage of her entire life.
Yeah, like, sorry to cut you off, but that's exactly it. No. Like, how this film has become so much more relevant as well, because it's like, you know, she is like, firstly, she's like disciplined and like, you know, tortured and physically, mentally, sexually abused, right? And then she like, it's almost like they're paying for their sins at a later point. So it's like you start off with a man that's doing that in her life, her stepfather, and all that kind of stuff, and a dance teacher and all that. And then she's then putting that back on them later on. And then, you know, this is like the ultimate catfish revenge in a way, where it's like they're pretending to make a film and they're trying to exploit these women. But then the worst thing about that is that she does it right back to them. She just does it in a worse degree. So you're kind of paying for your sins in a way. So it's like, I don't know if it was intentional or unintentional, but it's brilliant in that way, where she's like, you know, they're all kind of bad in their own right, you know, but like they're paying the price essentially for like trying to like manipulate her. And then when they deceive her, she deceives them in a worse way. So it's like tit for tat.
Yeah. And so I won't say that I know anything about Japanese culture, other than what I glean from movies and whatnot. But one of the things that really struck me on this watch was the opening like dialogue between Ayomi and his producer friend at the bar, where they're talking, and he's like, they're lonely. They're talking about loneliness in Japan. And then there's like a gaggle of girls in the background that are laughing and having a good time. And the producer kind of turns to him and says, "Awful girls, common, full of themselves, stupid, all of them. Where are the nice ones?" And he says that Japan is over. And so it's like this idea of like this traditional view of what they want in a woman. Yeah. And then when we first start to see Asami, we see her like sitting by the phone, almost like in a robotic pose. There's that moment where she has been waiting so long for him to call her that she's like all of a sudden hunched over, and she looks like she could be dead, or like a robot that just hasn't been turned on yet. And so we have like all this imagery kind of portraying, look, this is what you think of as like the traditional girl. She's quiet. She's waiting by the phone for you. She's meek and obedient, but she has like artistry and all this kind of stuff. And then we take that and it slowly starts to like churn into something even more horrific for them. And I think the script is a lot smarter than I gave it credit for on my first watch like a few years ago.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
And again, like, people just have assumptions about this movie because it's always hyped up as like the most fucked up movie you'll ever see. And like, I mean, I get it. It is pretty fucked up, especially by like American standards for like what we see in movies and everything. And I'm like, it's not that bad, but it is pretty fucked up, like, the whole thing. And like, I think when you watch it again and like you pay attention to what's going on in the background with everything, and if you kind of know what Asami's arc is, and then you're watching it again, like you're like, wait, oh, it's telegraphed so well, but it's so subtle. And it almost is like that like the kind of, we're used to seeing the J horror with the female ghosts like getting revenge from the grave, but here she's still alive and she's like fulfilling that similar role, but instead it's a little bit more nuanced and interesting. And I think Miike is doing a lot of really cool stuff, playing with expectations in a lot of genres, which is something he's so good at doing. And why it's so wild to look at his filmography and see all of the different kinds of movies that he's made and like what that has looked like. Like, that to me is always so funny because he also makes some really silly stuff. So it's so interesting to see like the kinds of things that go on inside of this man's brain. It's nuts.
Yeah. But, I mean, there's been so many spoilers up until this point, so here's another one. But it's like, again,
we're a spoiler cast. We're not worried about spoilers here.
Perfect. But it's like, it's the foot saw. Like, the way that scene happens and just the brilliance behind all of that. So it's just like, firstly, again, the sound design where you feel like it's in your brain and you're hearing your own bone being kind of cut through. But like the way then she pulls the wire out and it's all coiled up because it's been worn out from like getting through the bone. But then she just playfully tosses the foot aside and it's like as if it was nothing.
It's just against the sliding door and everything. It's like it's.
I was like grinding my teeth during that, and I was just like doing these weird like jerks in the couch, you know, where I'm just like, I don't want to be here anymore.
But like, I mean, I swear to God, Ari Aster has to thank Takashi Miike for this scene in Hereditary. I don't know if that's true, but to me, I'm just like, Takashi Miike's audition foot cutting scene is why Hereditary Toni Collette decapitates herself with the piano wire. Like, that is the pipeline I've decided. But like, because of the sound effects, and like, not even just because of that, but like the sound effects, which again, Nick, you talked about, like the sound design in this movie and how you hear just the sound of flesh and bone being sawed through, and the way that like it's not turned away from, and we just hear the like I can't even make the sound that like it's the sound of bone being like it's just so gross. And again, like, it's such a simple weapon and tool, but it's so fucked up. But I love the use of just piano wire and little needles, like these weird little almost dainty things being used for so much like destruction. It's just like kind of poetic in a fucked up sort of way.
Yeah. No, it's just and that's why we're talking about this film, because I'll like, there's so many films that I can forget, but this is tattooed into my brain. Like, there is just something, the sound, the like, again, the kitty kitty kitty, like, I'll never forget that. That's like in my horror nightmares, even to the point where I rewatched this for the sake of us having this conversation, and I dreamt about it last night. So
oh my God.
So like the sound was coming into my head, and I'm like, I'm going to stop and put something lighthearted. So I started watching that Tim Robinson show on Netflix. I Think You Should Leave, so that I could cheer myself up, because I was really kind of freaking out about it. So
oh my God, I
needed a palate cleanser.
I get it,
absolutely. But I can't imagine, because you said that when you were watching this, you were having flu symptoms and sort of in and out of a fever dream. I can't imagine this last bit in a fever dream, because this last bit is a fever dream. The way that it uses like flashbacks and nightmares and just a whole bunch of things that you're like, is this really happening, or when did this happen, or how is this happening? Involving the man in the bag, like coming out, and we realize that his feet have been cut off and his tongue's cut off, and he's missing all but like his middle finger and thumb, I think. And there's like, his tongue is ripped out, and he's lapping up this vomit bowl, and we're moving from that to like different color palettes of like blues, and just it's so, I can't imagine what it would be like watching that suffering
again,
in a fever
it's
dream.
exactly that, because like, you're thinking like all that stuff's happening, and then it cuts to him back in the hotel room where they first had their most romantic night, and suddenly you're like, oh, the reprieve. It's like, it was just a nightmare.
It was just
and
such
then
a
you're
nightmare.
like, no, it's not. Like, that emotional manipulation, my mind didn't know what was going on. I'm like, what is happening?
Well, and that was also like my experience watching it, of like, this is the first time I feel like at least the first time I can remember having like a movie really fuck with me so much and fuck with my head so much. Like, that to me was this experience of like having my head fucked with in a way that I have never experienced before. And I think that's what's so special about this movie, because I think if you're a horror fan who's not used to that, and like you're kind of used, like what to expect from American horror and kind of the subgenres that we have, and then you watch this and you're like, I don't know what's going on where I am. Like, the rules don't exist anymore. The rules that you think like govern a horror movie that don't actually, you're like, oh my God, everything's out the fucking window. Like, this is,
we're not safe. Nothing's safe.
Exactly. Nothing's safe. And I think like, that to me is such a wild thing that horror can create, in terms of that feeling of like safety being taken away. And I love that, and I love what it can do. And it sounds like, Nick, this movie got you into extreme horror. It sounds like you like a lot of the New French Extremity stuff, or at least did, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, no, I love, like, it like, I love all horror. Like, it doesn't matter, B grade, A grade, whatever it is, but I did get from this, it then got me into like, appreciating a slow burn as well, and like kind of going on that roller coaster into hell. So that was really important to me. And whilst I love things that are so high octane, like Evil Dead Rise and the Evil Dead remake and all that kind of stuff, this is just, it cuts differently. And it's like, you can't have chocolate milkshake all the time. Sometimes you want to branch out into strawberry, sometimes you want to branch out into something else, a caramel, and this is like that different type of flavor, and I appreciated it so much. But it was it definitely opened up my palette to like then understand foreign cinema as like, you know, like an untapped resource. Because prior to that, I was only watching American horror films, and they're awesome. And then there's like a whole other section of the world that has their own horrific stories to tell, and they're like told through a different lens.
Well, and you also come from Australia that has a bunch of fucked up horror too. Like, y'all have your own kind of national horror cinema, at least like in my head. Like the subsection of some of the Australian horror movies out there, it's like, oh my God, are y'all okay?
Yeah. People are asking us what's in our water, and it's like I can't tell you. It's just like maybe we're just evolving into something worse. But no, it's a really exciting time for like Australian horror filmmakers right now, because there have been like some awesome ones that have come out. Even just like traveling the world with some of them and doing, like, we had Monolith, and that's like not a, like it's a horror and it's a science fiction, but it was also kind of terrifying at times as well. Like, we're telling horrors differently as well.
Right? That's the podcast.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that one was really good. I saw that at a festival and was really impressed by it.
I don't think I've seen this one.
It was either South by or Overlook.
Yes, I think I saw it at South by.
Yeah.
Because the main woman is also one of the main women in Evil Dead Rise, which is really cool.
Yeah. And there's two like leads in that are Australian as well. So we're sort of jumping into the horror world from like behind the lens and in front of the lens, which is really exciting.
I love it.
So I don't know what's happening to Australians, but I'm here for it because it's exactly where I am.
I was curious because I have there's like a couple things I want to talk about in terms of Audition, but I am curious because we're talking about Australia. Has Australia always had like a horror scene, or is it more relatively new?
I think it has been there. I think now that the world's opening up and we've got like a lot more streaming platforms and places to use our voice, it's sort of becoming a little bit more kind of apparent. But like even back in the day, we had like Ozploitation of the 70s, where like there was a lot of like violent, horrifying films. And even, you know, then you go to like, was it Road Games, which was like quite big, that was like set in Australia. And then I just think that now we're like kind of we're in a position to be able to put our stuff out there for the world to see, and I think it's becoming more apparent. But like, we've got amazing storytellers, and you know, some of the few that I mentioned, which is like the Cairns brothers. You've got the Philippus with Talk to Me, and you've got Matt Vesely with Monolith. Like, we're all starting to like kind of get a little bit of recognition. I think it's really cool to see that the world's sort of accepting it and enjoying it as well. And
hell yeah.
Yeah, now we can start showing our fucked up nature to the rest of to everybody else. So
I love that. So the thing that I think really kind of surprised me rewatching Audition today was I think because we've sort of talked about how the ending is so fucked up, but it uses sound design. And I think when I think about the foot cutting scene, what I love is that it doesn't show a whole lot. It gives you some really graphic moments, but then it lets your mind sort of fill in the rest with the sound. But I was thinking as I was watching this that the whole way this movie is structured is so smart, because it starts off so innocuous that you're like, it kind of disarms you to the point where you're thinking, I am not watching a horror movie. And then by the time we get to the parts where we see the bag move and we see the nightmare scenarios and we see all that kind of stuff, because the low is so low, the high is so high, because we're not used to seeing anything horror in this movie. Because for most of it, it is like a romantic dramedy. And so I think that way that sort of slow build, it makes the end feel even more gargantuan than it actually is. And I think that's really cool, the way the film can do that.
Yeah, that's why I think it's like, you can't just tell someone to be like, hey, just watch the last 30 minutes, because that's where all the craziness happens. You have to go on that full ride to kind of, you know, feel the emotional pull, and also like understand Asami's journey and Aoyama's journey. You know, like I think you really need to go through that you know, that train ride till it descends into madness. And then because like the first time I think you see the violence is you see the oddness in like obviously the sack rolling over and her smirk, but the violence with like the tongue and like, you know, the guy's feet that aren't really his feet and all that kind of stuff. Like I'm not doing it any justice. Just go watch it. It's just like I've said so many weird, horrific things.
It's like so hard to describe it, because it's like the vibes are so rancid, which is a good thing. Like the vibes and the aesthetics of this movie are just so unnerving that like just describing it does not do enough justice to like what it feels like watching this movie and kind of like what Miike creates with this movie in terms of like the visuals and what's going, and like the way you're like asking questions about who is she, like who is Asami really, like what is going on here. It's like not something you can describe and like put into words. Like it really is a movie that you have to experience for yourself to really understand like just how bizarre of a mindfuck that Audition really is. Like
Yeah, and like, you know, again, back to like the whole Scarred for Life and it triggering me, like the sound design in this film is what inspired us with our film as well. So it's like a lot of the touching and all that. Like it was an important point when I was talking to you know, the guys like Benny who like did the sound design on our film. I was just like, every time she's touched, I want to feel it like as if we can hear it in our brain. And that was because of this film. So it's just like, you know, every time like they're pushing down on her chest and you can hear the bones kind of like on good speakers, maybe on a laptop, you might not be able to hear it. But like every time you hear her or feel her getting touched, I wanted that to be amplified. And that was all inspired by this film as well.
Wow. Cool. Wow.
Not trying to plug myself, but like that's
but like I love hearing how the things that shaped us as kids and as young people like go on to affect our like professional work though, and like how it has left such a mark on your subconscious and your brain that like it is influencing how you made your movie. And I think that is so cool, like how that evolution, how these things really do stay with us. They don't just go away. Even if we watch a million horror movies, you're always going to have those movies that stick with you and like influence a lot of the things you do. And I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. The other thing that jumped out at me on this watch is the cinematography from Hideo Yamamoto, because what I loved knowing how the movie was going to end this time is being able to like see how the movie frames everything that's happening. And one of the things that jumped out at me is that I forgot that this movie starts, first of all, with the death of his wife, and we see his kid coming in with the diorama as his mother is dying and as his wife is dying. And then we cut 2 years later and the kid's, you know, grown up. But there's the picture of his wife that sits on the desk, and I just love that the camera keeps lingering on that picture to the point when he's looking through all the resumes, the audition resumes, he turns the image away from him, and then there's like a shot also where the image is turned towards the camera and the camera's focused on him and it's blurred out, but that image is still there in the foreground, showing that she is still hanging on there. And I'll be honest, when I got to the end of the movie and we get the kind of killer POV of Asami moving through the house, right, before he comes home, and it goes into the office and it sees that picture, and I was like, oh no, that picture is going to cause the problem. But it's not just that, it's any kind of love, because she also brings up the kid that, oh, you love your kid, you're not supposed to do that, you need to love me. But like, I love that the camera focuses on that as sort of like a trick out that, oh, she's going to see that and flip out, but it's actually everything that she's flipping out about. Yeah. No, you're right. And going back to that point as well, like that's part of like the directing and the cinematography and the sound design. It's that manipulation, right? Like it's, he like, it starts off like, even the cinematography feels way more melodramatic at the start. Like it feels like a soap almost at that point. And then it then goes into almost like a comedy with all the jump cuts and like the match cutting and, you know, and then like all the flash kind of overlay type of thing of just how hectic it is. And then you're just held lingering towards the end. Then it goes into the fever dream where you have like all the intricate lighting where it's like you've got the reds and like even when the tongue is cut off in the bar, and like that's just like that's straight out of a horror movie. And then almost like the Italian horrors like that, you know, Argento was like doing. That's how colorful that is. And then you go into the torture scene and it's like, oh great, we're in this room right now. It's so raw and real. It almost just it like it evolves, and that's just part of the brilliance of this film. The other thing I think is so fascinating about Asami's character, and we've talked a little bit about this, but is the fact that he is looking for this kind of perfect for him girl of like being meek and obedient. And so what does she do? She gives him that. And so she's like, here, this is what you want. I'm going to fulfill your fantasies, and I'm going to fulfill that kind of aspect. But the moment that she's like, you got to love only me. And there's that moment where like she made a promise to him. I'm going to do this for you. And he breaks that promise in her warped mind. I just think it's so fascinating the way that the movie kind of presents her as that sort of perfect, and I'm using this in quotations, listeners, woman for this man, and in fact, he doesn't live up to her expectations. It's so fascinating.
That's what we were saying earlier. It's like, it's the be careful what you wish for kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's like he wanted that, very conservative, obedient type woman that, like, it was only just assets that he wanted. He like had to be like arty or a dancer or something like that, and wasn't really focusing on what was most important there. So it was just like finding a person for who they are and all that. And it's so brilliantly done. And that's why I was just like watching the tables turn and watching the script flipped to kind of go against everything that he wanted. It was great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Terry, how many kitties out of 5 do you give Audition?
5. I mean, I can't even beat around the bush. This movie is really good, and I think when I added it back to Letterboxd, and I noticed that when I first watched it, I gave it a 4, and I'm like, no, I maybe back then wasn't seeing all the intricacies that it was doing, but the fact that I was able to watch this knowing how it's going to end up and seeing the way that the narrative unfolds just made me fall in love with it even more. So for me, it's 5. What about you, Mary Beth?
Yeah, it's 5. Like I said, this gave me an intro into J-horror, into the world of like fucked up movies that aren't just about ghosts and the supernatural and monsters. And I think there's so much more going on here than just Asami being scary. And I think it's so smart in how it conveys this message of both misogynistic ideas in Japan and also like what happens, like what the extreme end of those misogynistic and patriarchal values might look like. And like, men, maybe you created this society where a woman wants you to love her, and if you don't, she goes a little bit crazy and cuts off your feet. So I
as you do.
This is the future that happens if you are an incredible. So I have to keep
poking the bear.
See what happens, motherfuckers. Supreme Court of the United States, I got a piano wire for you. I'm sorry, that's not a threat, everybody. It was a joke. Please, no one come for me. I am not going to do that. But Nick,
we've got your back.
Yeah.
Nick, you have the final word. How many kitties out of 5 do you give Audition?
I'm going to change it. I'm not going to give it any kitties. I'm going to give it 5 of those pins that go into his eyeballs, because it's like 5 out of 5. It's 5 out of 5. No, honestly, it's like, it is a 5 out of 5 kitties, because it's like unbelievable. And it's only getting better with age as well, like, which is really rare. Like, it's becoming more relevant. And again, I don't know if that was the intention, but it has done that with like the way that society has moved on, and like we understand now that things aren't okay. And this film is just hitting every tone in that way. So like, I love it, and can't recommend it enough.
Hell yeah. Well, thank you so much, Nick, for joining us to talk about Audition. Where can the listeners find you? And the floor is yours. What do you want to plug?
So we've got our film out on Tubi at the moment. So it's called Godless, the Eastfield Exorcism. So if you've got some time, check it out. Send us some love. Plug it. We don't have a marketing spend, like I said before. So it's like, if you want to get in touch, hit us up, like share it with your friends. But aside from that, I'm on Instagram, which is at Nick Kozakis, and our film is at Eastfield Exorcism movie, I think it is. Let me just double check that, because
we'll make sure to add it in the show notes to make sure everyone can go there.
Yeah, and like, but I love hearing from everybody, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me. You're doing amazing work for the horror community. The movies that you're bringing to light that a lot of people haven't heard of or haven't seen is just like being massive. So thank you so much to you two for doing such an awesome job.
Well, thank you.
We wouldn't have it if people weren't doing really cool stuff to highlight, so.
Yep, exactly.
That's me. Haha. So listeners, you've heard from us. It's Friday. Listeners, you hear from us. We want to hear from you. What was your experience with Audition? You can send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us directly on Twitter. I am at MB McAndrews.
And I'm at Gaily Dreadful.
And of course, don't forget to follow the podcast on Twitter at Scarred Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe. And if you want to help support us, we are on Patreon.
Thank you to Eric Power for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Please stay safe out there. But most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.